So let's talk about uniformity in traffic patterns and how we want to control them and how enterprises have been dealing with this so far. So when we think about things, there are kind of three fundamental traffic patterns that we see in the world today, right? We see traffic coming into your network. We see traffic going between the services in your network. And we see traffic coming out of your network. And these are the three kind of fundamental types of traffic that you have today. And what you're trying to achieve, right, is you want policies applied to this traffic that allows you to control, observe, secure, whatever it is, the interactions. If you look at how enterprises have evolved, so let's say this is your on-premise that you've been running in production for 30 years. You bought a tool to control this traffic. And you bought a tool, maybe, to control this traffic. And then you bought another tool to control this traffic. And those decisions were made over the course of many years. They were actually often made by different people, right? Very often, say, the traffic coming out of your network or the egress traffic, the tools bought there are bought by the security team. The traffic coming into your network, the tools are bought by the team that was made responsible for API management. And maybe the traffic between, maybe you bought no tool at all, or maybe eventually you added service mesh here. And you did this on premise. And then you adopted the cloud. You did the exact same thing. And you had Ingress into your cloud, you had traffic between the services in your cloud, and you had traffic coming out of your cloud. And maybe you used the cloud vendors' tools for this, or maybe a mixture of some of the cloud vendors' tools and some of the on-premise ones that you used, or something else. And you stamped this out many, many times. Maybe you have multi-cloud, and a mixture of multi-cloud and on-premise. And what we see typically is a huge diversity in the tools that are being used to solve these three fundamental traffic patterns, broken out by each environment or tool. Like maybe this is, you used a particular cloud vendor, right? But maybe you used VMs. And then, you had another stack where instead of using VMs, you used containers and used a different set of tools. And so when we look in enterprises today, we see a huge diversity of tools, right? On the Ingress side, on the east-west side, and on the egress case. Sometimes we see no egress tools being used at all. It's actually quite a common problem where, yes, I have tons of control on Ingress. I'm using an API management product. I maybe even have some controls using firewall rules or whatever is built into the platform that I'm using to get in control of some of the east-west traffic. But I have almost nothing on the egress side. Maybe I'm just using a very vanilla thing like a squid proxy. And this creates a huge aggregated problem, right? Because what you're really trying to do is saying, I want the same type of controls for each of these three traffic patterns, right? An API that you consume that's outside of your network, you don't really want to treat it any differently than an API that you build and expose to your users. You want the same policy controls for it as you want for the things that you build. And certainly it's true for internal services. So why do we have all these different technologies being used? And so what you want is some kind of uniform solution, because if you don't have the same kind of technology being used in each of these places, there's almost nobody who can reason about or understand what is the actual policy posture of the network flowing through my system as I add environments, and almost everybody has many environments. So what do we want to do about that? Because if you don't have that kind of uniformity in policy control, you're almost forced into this world of ticket ops, right? If I want this to be able to talk to this for some reason, or this is on premises and this is in the cloud, I have a business to run and this new service is getting built in the cloud, but it needs to talk to something on premise or vice versa. Well, now I have to deal with all the differences between these different systems. And the more connections I make across these environments, the bigger this problem becomes. It effectively becomes n squared. And that's not good when you're talking about policy, right? Never mind traffic, right? The policy complexity is actually really what starts to drown organizations. It means it's impossible to understand what the actual behavior is. And I have to go and file tickets with the owners of each one of these control systems to actually get the effect that I want out of the system. And so we have a philosophy at Solo, which is, look, you want the same policies everywhere. You want the same capabilities everywhere. You should probably use the same technologies everywhere. And so what we do is we try and use our proxy technology at each of these three primary network interaction points in the system. We call this the Omni gateway pattern. We want to use the same proxy, the same gateway, everywhere that there's a traffic flow. And that means that we can enforce the same set of policy controls everywhere that this traffic flows. And that means if we have a consistent set of policy, then the ability for the organization to reason and audit what that policy is and is doing works everywhere. And that, in conjunction with the fundamental properties of zero trust that we implement, so that I don't care what box these services live in, when any of these things communicate with each other, all the zero trust properties are preserved, which means I don't have to treat these as hard security boundaries because I get a much bigger aggregate security effect out of the system, allows me to automate and reason about policy and audit and understand who is actually allowed to talk to each other, regardless of environment, which is ultimately where you want to be as an enterprise. Because what we've seen in the industry is, it took 20 years for organizations to start moving from, let's say, on-premise to cloud, 10 years from cloud to containers, 5 years from cloud to functions, and maybe 1 year from functions to agentic systems. And so, the environmental velocity is picking up, the environmental diversity is increasing, which is increasing the policy and auditability load on organizations. And so we need to make the infrastructure more uniform and the policy expressiveness more uniform too, to allow enterprises to continue to scale. Because business is not slowing down, it is only speeding up. Visit solo.io to learn more about Omni Gateway.